Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Washington Focus. I'm here with the Eastern Washington reporter, Tim Clauser. Today, Tim, we're talking about your most recent story on the Spokane City Prosecutor's Office and has dismissed all misdemeanor charges for failure to disperse against the June 11th and the June 14th protesters. I think this is in regards to the ICE protest that we saw, ripples of stemming from the Los Angeles protests. Now, Tim, I think we should just start with some background for those who are unfamiliar. Can you just give us a quick overview of the events surrounding these protests in Spokane?
I mean, we can all take a few steps back to June. Like now, federal immigration enforcement was ramping up with the new administration in power. June 14th, it was nationwide. We saw these No King's Day protests. There was thousands of them. But in a lot of cities like Seattle, Spokane, Portland, California, days before that on June 11th, it was a weekday, I believe a Wednesday, we saw flare-ups. In Spokane, the former city council president, Ben Stucker, had called for protesters to come to a Department of Homeland Security facility in the city there to protest a transport of two migrants to a Tacoma facility. And in doing so, they surrounded an ICE vehicle. They allegedly slashed the tires, put bikes and stuff in front of the gate to block officers from leaving. And then later in the evening, as more and more people joined and different protests converged, pepper balls were deployed. Several advance warnings were given, asking the protesters to disperse. Some complied, some didn't. At the time, I believe it was over 30 something arrests were made on June 11th, and following that due to this, which notably was more than double the arrests in Seattle, as they were also facing similar protests. But most of these people were charged with a simple misdemeanor, failure to disperse. They were at an event, congregating with two to three or more people. That's the baseline for this charge. There was hundreds of people there. But there was imminent threat to property and people. So they could have caused injury or property damage. So those charges, all of them at the county and the city, have all been dropped now. There's some additional federal charges that are going on that the feds are pushing themselves, and the county has a few felony charges that they're still pursuing. But in terms of all the misdemeanor stuff, because this is the misdemeanor stuff goes back to municipal court, which is the city's court. All those have been dismissed. And then the county, a little bit after these protests, they were kind of slowly dismissing these cases as they went to court, but not because they didn't want to pursue them. It's because the sheriff's office responded to this event within the city limits when these protests took place. So when they arrested these people, they should have charged them under the municipal ordinance, but they didn't do that. So technically they were outside of their jurisdiction with some of the charges that they pressed. So they dismissed all those cases in the Spokane County Court, thinking that the city prosecutor would refile. But I talked to the city prosecutor and he said, you know what, we haven't refiled those. And we've actually dismissed all of the misdemeanor failure to disperse cases for all of the protesters related to June 11th and June 14th. And he didn't say, look, this is the end. We're not going to pursue charges. He said, this is the beginning of a long road ahead. And they kind of have 2 years now to refile these cases if they can build up big enough cases.
Okay. Yeah. The event was huge, right? So many arrests. I mean, when you see like dispersal of pepper balls and just that kind of dispersal, technology, I guess we can say, whatever strategies they can use just to remove a crowd, like it is an escalation. And hearing like how there's some confusion with like the sheriff's office coming in. I guess you can see how like this could cause some dysfunction here. Now, Tim, you talked to, like you were saying, the city prosecutor, Justin Bingham, and he mentioned understaffing and resource constraints that his office has been dealing with dating back to 2010. I mean, even though I think Spokane's population grew 25,000 since then. Now, how has like understaffing impacted the city's ability to handle cases like these where, a lot of people want to see justice being served to these people who, we're seeing mass protests that maybe escalate in this regard?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few points to tackle here. I mean, the prosecutor's saying, look, he said, we would love to just go forward and file charges right now. And they technically can do that. But the problem is that when they take these cases to arraignment in court, they have to have enough evidence to press these charges. And he's not confident that they do, not because there's not enough evidence, but because there's so much evidence. I mean, there was hundreds of officers and deputies on scene that day, in addition to the hundreds of protesters. There was all these arrests. There's hundreds of hours of body camera footage from all of these agencies that were on scene, including police reports, and sheriff's reports that all go into this. That takes a ton of time to comb over. And in Bingham's office, there's Bingham, and he has 13 attorneys. And he said that's roughly the same staffing level that he's operated at since the earliest he could think of, it was around 2010. So, I mean, in that time from 2010 to 2025, that 25-year period or 15-year period, we've seen the population increase by 25,000 roughly in Spokane. And, you know, you might think of that as everyday residents, but you're also taking into account increases in crime. And that also falls onto his office. So, you know, hundreds of hours of body camera footage is a lot for 13 or 14 people to mull over quickly and then push these through court. So, he said, you know, additional staffing would be great, but really they want some technical tools. He kind of described it as a software that could help them more quickly go through these hundreds of hours of body camera footage, go through all these police reports and compile these cases. Because like I said before, they might have dismissed the cases for now, but they have a 2-year statute of limitations. So they can refile, but that's contingent on them building up these cases. And he says that he thinks that there are several that could make for viable prosecutions, but it's really going to come down to whether or not they can afford this software. And another issue is that the city is facing a $14 million deficit right now. So I asked the mayor, I said, look, is it a priority within your first term? She has 2.5, 3 years left in her first term. Is it a priority for you to put more funding behind the prosecutor's office so that it can make cases on this, that it can go through all of that evidence and refile these charges before the statute of limitations runs out? And she essentially sent me a statement and said, look, I have not stepped in on this at all. I'm not telling the prosecutor's office what to say. At the same time, I support their work. But she recognized the city's financial crisis and said, I'm working to sustain funding for all public safety agencies. So, I mean, she specifically said sustain. There wasn't bolster or increase funding. She's looking to keep it the same. And Bingham told me, I mean, he might have seen increases in funding over the years, but that's keeping him operating at the same level that he was around 2010. So, I mean, if they're going to sustain funding, or maybe he'll see little increases that keep him in line with where he's at right now. I mean, he's still 15 years behind what he thinks he should be at. So, I mean, that's an issue for him. And if it does come down to these resources, the question is, I mean, is the city going to find enough money to make this happen in time? Or is he going to kind of be chasing his tail on this for the next 2 years? And when it comes down to it, I mean, maybe they can push 1 or 2, but he said they don't really want to do that. They don't want to go and make an example with 1 or 2 people, especially in such a high profile issue like this, not only in Spokane, but nationwide. Right. He said they're looking to do many of these cases, if not all of them. But again, it's a money thing.
Yeah. And I'm hearing this over in Western Washington, all the cities I cover, Tim. No one's ever talking about increasing funding right now. It seems like every jurisdiction, every city, county is having some sort of budget issue, whether it's because they don't adhere to, they're losing federal funding, or just still that gap created from the COVID-19 pandemic. So that, you know, that term we're saying sustained funding, I'm hearing in Seattle, I'm hearing it over in Bellingham, King County, Pierce County, et cetera, right? And so it's interesting to hear you say that, because to me, I sense tension between, you know, Mayor Brown's, you know, her administration's priorities and the prosecutor's needs. And so there's just like this gap right now, I'm sensing.
Yeah. I will say that, you know, in talking to the prosecutor, I asked him, I said, you know, a lot of people are critical of the mayor's position around things like homelessness, taxes, immigration, kind of her stance against the Trump administration in some regards. I said, I mean, how would you respond to residents that say, look, I feel like the mayor's putting pressure on the prosecutor's office? And he said, Tim, it's not a conspiracy. He said, the Brown administration is handling this no differently than the Woodward administration, which is Brown's predecessor. She was a conservative, unlike Brown, who's a progressive. He said both administrations would have handled this the same, and that they've been nothing but supportive. And he said there's been no inkling from the mayor's office down to SPD and other parts of the city that they shouldn't prosecute these cases. But again, it comes down to money. And from what the mayor told me, it doesn't sound like there's going to be enough in the pot for them to hand to the prosecutor's office to get this through the door. I do want to make one note. I mean, this is a high profile issue. A lot of people are thinking about this, and it was just in June this summer. It's still fresh on our plate. But I mean, this is 30 some cases, and it would make somewhat sense if the mayor said, look, we have a $14 million deficit. It's projected to reach $50 million over the next few years if we don't address it. Maybe it's not the best idea to devote extra resources just to prioritize 30 misdemeanor cases. But at the same time, I mean, a large part of the city would say, look, this is a priority for us. I mean, another issue with Spokane is that, I mean, you have the city of Spokane, which is the second largest city in the state. It's a big blue dot in a big red county. So, I mean, the city might voting wise pop up more blue than red, but you still have a lot of quiet people in the city that might not, I mean, swing the same way voting as a lot of the more vocal residents that testify at these meetings.
I think last question here, we have to look ahead here, and I have to ask, do you anticipate the city of Spokane to refile these charges? And, you know, what factors like public pressure, election cycles might influence that decision?
I can't speculate here. Okay. I mean, I can say Bingham wants to refile these. And he said it's going to come down to money. The mayor said she's not stepping in, but that she's looking to sustain funding. I mean, I think it's kind of there black and white that the prosecutor wants to do it, but it's going to come down to money. And right now that doesn't look very likely. Maybe things will change over the next 2 years. Maybe there will be more pressure put on the administration to push these. But again, I'll circle back to that other argument, just, that, you know, these are 30 misdemeanor cases, and that the administration might not see it as a priority to put more funding behind tackling these otherwise minor charges compared to, say, homelessness and opiate abuse downtown, or potentially the loss of millions of dollars in federal funding. And then one more thing I do want to note. I mean, this comes around the same time. I mean, this week, the council just passed a law that prohibits ICE agents from entering permitted events without a warrant. And just recently, the U.S. Department of Justice put out a list of sanctuary jurisdictions where they could potentially lose federal funding for having laws and practices in place that impede federal immigration enforcement. So this might not look good to the Trump administration. I mean, federal judges in court have blocked the Trump's push to withhold federal funding from sanctuary jurisdictions. So, I mean, Spokane's not on the list right now. Seattle and the rest of Washington state is, but Spokane's not on the list. But I mean, the feds are looking at Spokane and other cities that are doing this. And there's no saying that Spokane might not be on a future list and that a future judge might rule differently and say, look,
right,
I'm going to clear the way for you to pull funding. And if it did so, I mean, that would be very detrimental, not only to Seattle, I mean, Spokane's funding and police funding specifically, but Seattle, Washington state, and all those other areas of the country that are on this list.
Seems like the Trump administration right now is a little preoccupied with Baltimore and Chicago and Washington, D.C. But you're right, Spokane might be on a list in the future, and that's something that I'm sure officials will be considering. And going back to your point, it's always about money, right? There's that divide there. And I think Wu-Tang Clan said it best. Cash rules everything around me, right, Tim?
You could say that, Spencer.
Well, thanks, Tim, for talking to me about your story. And you had a story recently that's kind of blowing up on social media a bit. Congratulations, but it's not great news. It's not great news. But basically, what we have here is a group of Washington state Republican senators are calling for the repeal of a state law. Now, that law we're talking about is the Keep Washington Working Act. Now, I'm sure a lot of people know about it, but in case viewers don't, essentially, this law restricts local law enforcement from aiding in federal immigration enforcement. Now, this has been flagged as a sanctuary jurisdiction law, and this is something that the Trump administration is trying to tackle and is threatening to cut federal funding to these sanctuary jurisdictions. This law right here has the state of Washington on the list, along with the city of Seattle, who has their own Keep Washington Working Act of their own. So let's get into this, Carlene. Basically, let's start off with what are some of the most problematic aspects of this law that Republicans are flagging right now?
Right. So as you mentioned, these 4 Republican senators, and I spoke to Senator Phil Fortunato, who represents Auburn and some parts of Pierce County as well. But his folks reached out to me and said, forward me a copy of the letter that they had sent to Governor Bob Ferguson saying, okay, we've now got the Trump administration coming after us because we're not cooperating with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Please take this seriously. As you mentioned, millions, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars on the line to be withheld, because it's not just withholding federal funds for one certain thing like transportation or something else. I mean, there are so many different chunks of federal funding that our state is reliant upon that are now, there's the threat of withholding those entirely if we don't cooperate. So Senator Fortunato's office reached out to me, and I was able to interview him. And he said, what gives, basically? We've got this, keep Washington working, keep these families together act, but it's in direct contradiction with federal law at this point. So this is where it got really interesting, Spencer, because Senator Fortunato reached out to a policy advisor in the governor's office very early this year. It was in February, and said, okay, so we know this directive is coming down from the Trump administration that says we have to cooperate. And if these criminals are being released from Department of Corrections, we need to alert ICE, right? So they can come get these guys before they're released back into the community. What he was told, Senator Fortunato's office was told at the time, was that there were 2, maybe 3 individuals that were serving in the Department of Corrections. So in the prison system, not in county jails, not in the King County facilities, right? That he said 2 to 3. So Fortunato went back then to Department of Corrections and Homeland Security and said, really, that seems like a super low number. Like, really, how many of these guys are in custody? And at the time, and this was based on statistics ending through 2024, they said 310 individuals.
That's
large discrepancy.
Yeah, huge.
Right.
I mean, why such a gap? That's just like the biggest question that comes to my brain when I read the article and I see that, 2 versus 310. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, and then this is where the story got even all the more interesting. Excuse me. So then I went back to communications person Brianna Aho in Governor Ferguson's office and said, so here's the numbers that Senator Fortunato got. And let me just highlight a couple of these, because this isn't, and I think I wrote this in my article, Spencer, that, people always say, like, we're going to lose all of our folks that work in our hotels, all of our landscape workers, whatever, if we, deport illegal aliens. These folks, these 310 folks are in Department of Corrections custody, at least up through 2024. 130 of them were in there for sex offenses, rape, very serious sex crimes, 94 for homicide, 38 for assault on various serious degrees, 22 for robbery, 12 for drugs, 8 for weapons possession, 2 for kidnapping, and then we had 111 for DUI, fraud, forgery, and arson. So these are very serious crimes. As I mentioned, I went back to Brianna Aho in Ferguson's office and said, what gives? Your guys policy advisor told Fortunato there were 2 or 3. We found out from DOC and Homeland Security that we've actually got 310. The response I got from Brianna Aho in Ferguson's office was, who gave you that information and on what date? Was this an email chain? I need to know exactly who this employee was from our office. Never responded to the actual question that I raised. Why such a difference? She was more interested in finding out where I got the information, who provided the information, and on what date.
And when you talk about the information, are you talking about the listed 2 people, or are you talking about the 310?
Both. She wanted both. And I said, okay. I forwarded her the information that I got. I mean, this was basically publicly available information, right? Senator Fortunato received this information from DOC and Homeland Security. It was all on his work email. And I saw he forwarded me the direct emails. What she wanted to know on the other side of that was also who in our office said 2 or 3. Now, I don't know if that's because she knew that that was inaccurate information and they wanted to call this person out, or she wanted the dates, all that information. The follow-up story that I intend to pursue here is the fact that this policy advisor was placed on leave from Governor Bob Ferguson's office on the 1st of July. She's been placed on leave, and as of 2 days ago, this leave has been extended through at least the first part of the year. This policy advisor, Sahar Fathi, is not responding to me at this point for my request for information as to, did you ask for this leave? Because the statement that went out from the governor's office was to say, we love her. She's amazing. She's worked so hard for us. Basically, that legislative session earlier this year was very difficult for her. And so we're going to honor her leave. Well, did she ask for it, or was she pressured to take leave? Because you and I well know sometimes these folks that are suddenly placed on leave without explanation maybe didn't ask for that of their own volition, that maybe there was something else going on. And if in fact, the fact that she met with Senator Fortunato and provided information to him has any part of this leave, that's what I want to know. There's a much bigger story here that hopefully once I receive some response to my public records request, we'll find out. But for now, the big mystery is why such a discrepancy. And I think the reason why this has picked up so much traction on X and other social media, Spencer, is the fact that Washington taxpayers, forked out about $23 million to keep these 310 inmates in Department of Corrections custody and not let ICE know when these folks are being released.
Like, you just
people pissed off.
Could you just maybe explain how you came up with that $23 million figure? I know you did the math, right, Carlene?
Yeah, did the math, and I was double checking my numbers because I was like, this is a big chunk of change, and it might even be more than this because. So it's basically $75,000 per inmate per year, right? In Department of Corrections custody. This is for the staff that has to guard them. This is for their meals. This is for their health care. That's probably a low end figure. And I say that because some of these guys are older inmates as well. Of course, healthcare costs are going to be more. Also, many of them are on specialized diets, and that's going to cost more. So the $75,000 is kind of a low end estimate. And that, because that also accounts for some that are in, facilities where they're not under, they're not in major lockdown. They might have, some access to some freedoms. So that might be a lower cost estimate. That is anywhere from like 56 up to 75. Then you've got ones that are 75 upwards of $100,000 per inmate. So this was kind of an average I took. I felt comfortable using that ballpark because I didn't have specifics on a breakdown for these 310. So, but anyway, it's over $23 million a year that Washington taxpayers are paying to keep these 310. And as we mentioned, that's only the folks that are in our prison system. This isn't accounting for the folks in the King County Jail, local jails, city jails that are also, yeah, I don't have access. We don't have access to that information. So we don't know how many more there are. Certainly it's a lot more than the 310 from DOC.
Or more than 2 for sure, right?
More than 2 for sure. And again, I would love to get an explanation as to where that figure came from. Obviously Senator Fortunato went, 2 or 3 versus the 310 he found out. What gives? I'm not getting answers at this point as to that. Discrepancy.
And this all stems from I've reported on this, Carlene, and you've mentioned in the story here, and that's Attorney General Pam Bondi threatened to withhold federal funds from the state, and Ferguson responded saying he's not going to budge on repealing the Keep Washington Working Act, citing that this is part of the state's values, right? This law is he's encompassing everyone in the state, but with that being said, he calls the federal threats posturing and vowed to defend Washington's sanctuary policies. Now, I'd like to ask if you've talked to so many, lawmakers, sheriffs that, about this, issue of illegal immigration. Now, do you think there's any common ground we could find with the supporters of this act just to address these public safety concerns?
That's a really good question. And I can almost guarantee you from some conversations I've had, even off the record with unnamed lawmakers, that they intend this 2026 legislative session to go back and try and make some changes, because, their sense is it's not working and it's put us in direct contradiction with federal law. And Trump's made no secret. He's not going to let this go. So in the meantime, what do we do? Right? Because if some of the, and Senator Fortunato in our conversation brought up, like, we've got a couple of bridges, like the bridge out to Buckley that got hit by a truck a few weeks ago, and that could be out for months, if not longer. Without federal funding, without the infrastructure for projects like that, we're going to be screwed. And we've got, and that is a direct daily impact for the Washington taxpayer, not necessarily immediately out of the pocket, like, okay, I got to pay to keep this inmate in custody, even though ICE wants to know where they are. This is somebody who's going 17 miles out of their way, 2 ways a day to go around a bridge closure. And now with federal funding, in jeopardy, that bridge isn't going to get fixed. Those are impacts that, hit all of us that, maybe people don't make the direct correlation, but, those are things we have to consider. So I would certainly guess that we're going to have an effort to amend this law during the legislative session. And I hope you're right. I hope there's room for bipartisan conversation. I've been told that those conversations are already taking place, in advance, in anticipation of some pre-filed bills. So, this is one I know we're going to be following and keeping close tabs on. Meantime, federal funding is going to be withheld at this point, and we'll see what the administration does.
Carlene, it's always interesting. I've worked here for over 3 years now, and you get a glimpse of what the state session is going to be, about. What are the priorities? And it seems like this year we're really going to see a lot of talks, negotiations within state lawmakers about how do we combat potential loss of federal funding, whether that's Republicans saying, well, how about we adhere to their demands so that we can receive funding that doesn't come out of state taxpayers, or, as we see continuously from, state Democrats, that we must take a stance on our values, right? So that is something that I'm sure you'll keep in mind and look at seeing what goes on and when the upcoming session comes. And Carlene, when the time comes, I know you'll be busy, and those trips down to Olympia will be frequent, right?
My brain's already spinning thinking about legislative session, and it's still, August. So.
We're sweltering in the heat still, but eventually you'll be in the cool chambers of Olympia.
Taking a kind of a deep dive into what's going on at the office of Washington State Attorney General Nick Brown. And the latest salvo is that Solicitor General Noah Purcell is now the focus of a Washington State Bar Association complaint alleging misconduct related to a response on A.G. Brown's behalf. Okay, you're going to have to back us up. We're going to pretend that nobody has heard any prior podcasts or read any of your previous articles about what you have been uncovering per your public records request, TJ. So back us up to what's going on and what you've uncovered.
I'm going to keep it really simple for viewers who are not familiar with it. Our Attorney General has been accused of engaging in unethical behavior related to their support of a lawsuit, a private law firm filed against the Trump administration. So it was initially a state bar complaint that the State Bar Association has chosen to look into. Nick Brown ignored their request for a response to the allegations until I reached out to them about it for comment. And instead of him responding, it was Noah Purcell, the Solicitor General, who is now subject to a bar complaint of his own. And one thing I've noted with some comments that people have made online when this has been posted on social media is that anyone can file a bar complaint. Why is this a big deal? Well, clearly they didn't read the story, because this is a very unique complaint in that the complaint alleges that Noah Purcell, who was working on what's called an amicus brief, was communicating directly with another attorney's client without their consent. And there is a rule saying you cannot do that. I reached out to the Attorney General's office and the attorney for this client and said, did you get the consent? Was consent granted? And neither responded. So Noah Purcell has to prove that he got consent. He's in a position where he has to prove his innocence. So this is a unique complaint in that the person who filed the complaint doesn't have to prove anything. The person who had the complaint filed against him has to prove that consent was granted. And so if he can't get the attorney involved, which is based in DC, to say in some way, shape, or form, yeah, we gave consent, but they also have to prove that they actually did give consent at the time. They can't retroactively say we grant consent. So that's what's going on right now with this bar complaint. So for people who say that anybody can file a complaint, why is this a big deal? Because the allegations are very unique and significant because of the circumstances involved.
So you said that WSBA, the Bar Association, went to the office and asked for a response after the complaint, and they didn't respond until you pushed further. Can you elaborate on that?
So they sent a letter to Nick Brown in, I believe, May, saying you need to respond by this date in June, and Nick Brown did not respond. They sent him a follow-up letter saying you have until July 16th, and if you don't, we can subpoena you and we can suspend your license to practice law. He still did not respond as of a month of that letter. And
wow.
The response from Noah Purcell to the State Bar Association came the day after I reached out to the State Bar Association for comment on these allegations. And so what's interesting also is that state bar complaints are private matters. The State Bar Association is a private organization, and the inquiries are done against lawyers in their positions as private attorneys. The reason why we're covering this story, aside from the allegations, is that it involves attorneys acting in public offices. The Attorney General, who's an elected position, the Solicitor General, who's appointed, and it's regarding taxpayer dollars. And also, they're using public resources to defend Nick Brown and his private inquiry or private complaint leveled against him. So they've turned this into a public matter on so many levels. But on top of that, the communications and the investigation are now subject to public disclosure. So this is a very weird, I want to say weird, it's just unusual. This is not something that happens often. And so that's, again, where someone would say anybody can file a bar complaint. Well, that's nice, except the stakes involved are much higher than a complaint by a disgruntled client against their attorney in some private matter that doesn't involve the use of taxpayer dollars. And also the stakes, when I say that the stakes are high, the court case that the law firm was pursuing against Trump could be overturned because the courts have ruled in favor of them so far. This can be used as evidence by Trump's attorneys to get this case overturned.
And take me back to Perkins Coie had these contracts with the federal government. Trump came in, didn't like them and basically terminated contracts. And then that kind of set this all off. Is that accurate?
Yeah, he sent out, he issued executive orders, canceling their contracts, which were not insignificant, revoking their security clearance, and removing their access to federal buildings. And so they filed they filed two things. They filed a complaint, but they also filed a motion for a temporary restraining order. It's noteworthy to note that the AGO's amicus brief, which is effectively a friend of the court brief, where you're acting as a neutral party, was only filed in support of the temporary restraining order. So if the motion had been denied, the AGO's involvement would have ended. And so it really begs the question of who stood to benefit from that amicus brief other than Perkins Coie? And how does this, in what ways does this benefit Washington State? What's the taxpayer angle there? On top of that, so the other thing Noah Purcell's getting complaint against is the fact that they're using public resources. One, he can't legally represent Brown in this thing.
And explain that. Why can't he?
Well, so the Attorney General's office is not allowed to give legal advice or counsel to private individuals. And Nick Brown is being investigated as a private attorney. The Solicitor General can defend Nick Brown as in his position as the state attorney general.
Okay.
And also Noah Purcell's letter was written on behalf of Brown, but also the Attorney General's office. Bar associations do not investigate law firms. They can't, and they explicitly say, do not file a complaint against a law firm. You have to file a complaint against specific attorneys for specific reasons. So you can't suspend somebody's license because they worked at a law firm where another guy did something he shouldn't have been doing. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say do we have any sense of, this seems like there's so many layers of potential misconduct. I don't even know how else to frame it here. It seems like this, you've talked to some people and you and I spoke about this, I think last week, TJ, that, you've got people that are willing to tell you off the record, this is crazy what's going on in Washington State. This is highly unethical, whatever, use all kinds of terms for that. Yeah. But then they weren't willing to talk to you on the record. And are you still kind of running into some of that resistance?
I think that's when I realized that we were onto something was a while back when I reached out to so many different people. I reached out to ethics, legal ethics experts. Like they'd
be all over this.
People all over the country. I reached out to people who could not be, I couldn't imagine they'd be fans of our current Attorney General's office. And if I got a no comment, that was at best. Most people just ignored my communications. They just wouldn't touch it. And so I realized when no one is willing to talk to you about something, it's a big deal because nobody wants to be the person to come out and say the emperor, for lack of a better description or analogy. No one wants to be the person to say the emperor has no clothes. And honestly, as I've been telling people, I go, look, right now, the only opinion that matters is the Office of Disciplinary Counsel for the State Bar Association. They're really the only people whose opinions matter because they're the ones who get to decide whether or not this constitutes unethical behavior. And they're the only ones who can punish Brown or Purcell with fines or suspending their license to practice law or anything like that. So that's been really, I thought that was very fascinating when just people went completely radio silent on this issue, even behind the scenes, where I was reaching out to I was just reaching out to like friendly attorneys I know in other states and just saying, what's going on? I do remember I was talking to one from Tennessee and I talked to him about how the State Bar Association was looking into this and his jaw literally fell. He said, that doesn't happen. Like he couldn't believe it. So now
where does it stand though? We've got the Bar Association looking into both Brown and Purcell at this point. Is there like an expected timeline and what are the possible consequences here?
Well, so to give an update on the complaint against Brown, the person who filed the complaint has filed a response to their response with additional information. And so now, don't want to get too much into it just because it's still developing. But one of the issues is whether or not the Bar Association should accept Purcell's response as legitimate because it's like you ask someone hey, I'd like to talk to you, and they send someone else in their stead.
Right.
When it's not legally appropriate. So that's the question of whether or not they're even going to acknowledge that. And then on top of that, if the State Bar Association decides to launch an inquiry into Purcell, they're going to send him a letter saying, hey, you need to respond to these allegations. And then he has to send a response. If maybe we have to reach out now that we've broken the story already, because we didn't go public originally with the inquiry into Brown's conduct. But they only responded after we reached out. So now that the story's out, I think there's probably going to be some more pressure for him to actually respond.
Wow. It doesn't seem like I can, open my computer inbox or turn on the TV these days without seeing something either coming from Brown's office against the Trump administration or them being investigated or questioned, complaints coming in. I mean, he's not, I'm sure he's getting some things done for Washington State, but he's also having to spend a heck of a lot of time and, as you mentioned, taxpayer resources defending against this stuff. And I can't imagine what that dollar figure looks like right now. Already.
Well, if there is a dollar figure, we're going to find out. So I think it's good for taxpayers to know how much money of theirs was spent to defend a private law firm's access to federal contracts, a security clearance, and access to federal buildings. And why, and, I think the question then is how is that not a use of public resources for private gain, which is that is explicitly
not legal,
prohibited in Washington State. So this story's not going away anytime soon. It's still developing. Yeah.
Well, you have been the man on this story, uncovering it. I've seen a couple of other outlets pick up your coverage since, but I know you have a lot more to come. Are you giving us a hint of the next chapter? I keep asking you this every week. Give us a hint of what the next salvo is.
Yes, I've got another story on Nick Brown on a separate topic, but could be just as legally problematic. For him or his office. So that's,
I'm sure you are his new best friend, TJ. You're going to be invited over for dinner this weekend. I'm certain of it. Well, thank you, TJ. I appreciate your coverage of this. If readers are interested in checking out TJ's article, you can go to thecentersquare.com/Washington. Along with TJ Martinell, I'm Carlene Johnson. This has been Washington in Focus.